In June of 2021, 5-year-old Summer Wells vanished from her family's home on Ben Hill Road in the rural Beech Creek community of Hawkins County, Tennessee. What began as an ordinary summer afternoon quickly spiraled into one of the most extensive search efforts the region had ever seen. On the evening of June 15th, just after 6:30, a call went out to Hawkins County Dispatch. Summer was gone. According to early reports, she had walked out of the house and disappeared within minutes. Despite her family's immediate search, there was no trace of her. Local responders mobilized that same night. Dozens of firefighters, rescue squads, and deputies fanned out through the steep, heavily wooded terrain around the Wells property. Helicopters scanned from above while searchers on the ground called out her name through the hollows. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation joined within hours, and by after midnight, an endangered child alert was issued statewide. By the next afternoon, the alert had been elevated to a full amber alert, signaling that investigators believed Summer was in imminent danger. Search operations grew rapidly. The FBI's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team arrived, along with specialized K-9 units, aerial surveillance, and teams trained for extreme terrain. At the height of the effort, more than 120 agencies were involved, working shoulder to shoulder in grueling summer heat. Across those first several days, law enforcement repeatedly emphasized the conditions. The hills and hollows were so steep and overgrown that visibility dropped to only a few feet in places. Cell service was poor, radios often failed, and crews were forced to haul their equipment in by foot. Even so, officials estimated that by the end of the month, more than 2,400 acres, nearly 5 square miles, had been searched. Tips were pouring in as well. In the first week, the TBI received over 200 tips, and by the end of June, the number had climbed past 800. But despite the volume, none produced the breakthrough investigators desperately needed. At daily press briefings, spokespeople from the TBI and Sheriff's Office stressed 2 points. First, that the circumstances of Summer's disappearance remained unclear, and second, that every possibility was still on the table. They urged residents to recheck sheds, barns, crawl spaces, and trail cameras, while reminding the public that only trained professionals should take part in the search. From the start, investigators also warned against misinformation. Social media speculation was already spreading faster than facts. During this period, officials released the description of a red or maroon Toyota Tacoma with a ladder rack, hoping to identify the driver as a potential witness. Meanwhile, the Wells family began speaking to reporters. Don Wells publicly stated that he believed Summer had been abducted, describing her love of the outdoors as both her joy and her vulnerability. Candace Bly gave her first on-camera interview nearly 2 weeks later, offering her account of planting flowers, walking Summer back into the house, and then realizing within minutes that she was gone. By June 27th, search operations were formally scaled back. After nearly 2 weeks of relentless effort, the massive all-hands response gave way to a more targeted, investigative approach. Nearly 5 square miles of wilderness had been scoured by teams from more than 70 agencies, yet no confirmed trace of Summer was found. And during those first 13 days, the reward fund was established. 2 large donations, one for $25,000 and another for $10,000, seeded the fund, which totaled $35,250 by month's end. 13 days after she vanished, the circumstances of Summer Wells's disappearance were no clearer than on the night she was reported missing. Despite hundreds of tips, thousands of acres searched, and the combined efforts of local, state, and federal agencies, the little girl from Ben Hill Road remained missing. By the end of June 2021, the search for Summer Wells had already become one of the most extensive efforts in Tennessee history. More than 2,400 acres had been scoured, hundreds of tips had been investigated, and a reward fund had been established. But despite the involvement of local, state, and federal agencies, no confirmed trace of the 5-year-old was found. What followed over the next 12 months was a series of searches, statements, and legal developments, a timeline marked by shifting strategies, public speculation, and ongoing uncertainty. By July, the search for Summer Wells had left its initial crisis stage and entered a period of adjustment. The massive, around-the-clock sweep of June gave way to a steadier, more deliberate process. The agencies involved were re-evaluating their roles. The gaps exposed during the first 2 weeks were starting to be addressed, and both the family and the community were beginning to face the longer reality of an open, unresolved investigation. On July 8th, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation provided an update. More than 870 tips had been received to date, though none had led to answers. Officials stressed that the case remained active and ongoing, with TBI agents, the Hawkins County Sheriff's Office, and the FBI continuing to work side by side. They urged residents in the Beech Creek area to contact authorities if they hadn't already done so, and specifically asked property owners with surveillance or trail cameras to share any footage. Even the smallest detail, they said, could prove beneficial to the investigation. On July 21st, 2 key developments occurred. The Department of Children's Services confirmed its involvement in the investigation into Summer's disappearance. Officials declined to explain exactly how they were involved, but their role would go on to have lasting implications for the Wells family. That same day, EquiSearch Midwest announced they would be rejoining the search efforts in Beech Creek beginning the weekend of July 24th, bringing specialized resources to assist local authorities. By mid-July, cracks in the county's emergency communications revealed deeper systemic issues. Hawkins County had long struggled with poor radio and cell coverage, common in its rugged terrain, and repeated efforts to upgrade the system had been canceled or delayed. The issue wasn't new. For years, local responders had complained about dead zones, failed radios, and dangerous gaps in coverage. Funding had been set aside to upgrade the system, but the project stalled, explanations shifted, and no real progress was made. At a July 21st Public Safety Committee meeting, that history boiled over. Members openly confronted emergency leaders, demanding to know why. After years of warnings and budget promises, crews were still forced to borrow radios from neighboring counties just to stay in contact during one of the largest searches the region had ever seen.
Meanwhile, this afternoon, the Hawkins County Public Safety Committee discussed ongoing issues with their 911 and radio systems that some say impacted the initial ground search efforts in the search for Summer Wells. Leaders with the Churchill Rescue Squad, the Hawkins County Rescue Squad, the Emergency Management Agency, and 911, as well as other operation leaders, spoke in front of this committee today in Rogersville. A lot of praise toward emergency leaders, but committee members expressed frustration over the lack of information about the investigation, and they felt they were blamed for communication issues.
We approved, and we all know where those radios are sitting at.
I personally was not given authorization to do that.
That's fine that you weren't, and I understand. I've covered my butt too, but I mean, it had nothing to do with you. I'm just saying it was given. We gave authority to do that, whether it be you or whoever.
That was the committee co-chair Dawson Fields and EMA director Jamie Miller. Each report mentioned the issues faced by crews on the ground in Beech Creek during the search and how it brought about some safety concerns.
We're trying to come to the commission to say, hey, help us. We're not pointing blame. I don't think any agency here would point a finger at any one of you guys or any one of them when every one of these seats are filled. This is just providing information to help you guys make the right decision for us.
Last year, the committee approved $425,000 for an analog system and received a $250,000 emergency community development block grant that took some time to come in, according to Miller. Now the county is facing equipment shortages due to the pandemic.
On July 27th, the Churchill Rescue Squad announced it would no longer serve as the lead agency in search operations. From that point forward, the Hawkins County Sheriff's Office became the primary agency overseeing the case. 2 days later, on July 29th, Candace Bly confirmed that Summer's 3 brothers had been taken into DCS custody the previous week. Don Wells also confirmed their removal but did not offer details on why. Meanwhile, the community continued to gather weekly, holding prayer meetings for Summer's safe return and offering support to the Wells family. At the same time, the reward fund continued to grow and reached a total of $37,970 by the end of July. The fund was established to encourage credible information leading to Summer's recovery, and its steady increase reflected both local and national attention on the case. By August, misinformation surrounding the case had become a growing obstacle. On August 4th, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation reiterated that the search remained active and ongoing, and renewed their call for information about a 1998 to 2000 maroon or red Toyota Tacoma. The truck was reported in the Beech Creek and Ben Hill Road area on either June 14th or June 15th, and investigators emphasized they still wanted to identify the driver. They also addressed rumors circulating online. A photo of a truck that looked similar had been widely shared on social media, with claims it had been located. TBI made clear this was not accurate and stressed that the photo had not come from law enforcement. Officials also warned the public about individuals soliciting donations under the pretense of helping investigators, reminding everyone that no private citizens had been asked to assist in the search. Around the same time, the Hawkins County Sheriff's Office used its official Facebook page to push back against another persistent rumor, that psychics were involved. The post made it clear that no psychics had ever been used, a correction aimed at silencing speculation that had gained traction online. On August 11th, Sheriff Ronnie Lawson appeared in a video released by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. He reassured the public that the search was not over and that the investigation remained active.
I understand people's curiosity about where we're at in the case as far as investigation. I know people speculate, and I understand that. But they have to understand our number one goal from day one is to find Summer. And everybody's still a suspect, person of interest, however you want to put it. And we're still very intensely looking into it.
His most striking comment was a reminder that everybody's still a suspect, person of interest, however you want to put it. That line underscored the fact that 2 months in, investigators had not ruled anyone out. And, by the end of August, the Summer Wells Reward Fund had reached nearly $40,000. By September, the investigation had generated more than 1,000 tips, but none had led to credible or actionable evidence. Authorities emphasized that every lead was being checked, yet progress remained out of reach. On September 23rd, the TBI issued a fresh news alert, a reminder that the case was far from over, and that investigators were still searching for the truth.
I'm Leslie Earhart with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. We thought we would take a few minutes to update you on the search for 5-year-old Summer Wells. As you know, she was reported missing from her home on Ben Hill Road in Hawkins County on June 15th. Unfortunately, there's still more questions than answers, but we haven't given up, and we won't. Agents and detectives with the Hawkins County Sheriff's Office continue to work daily to determine what happened to Summer.
But we're still looking, we're still searching, we're still following tips. And one thing that we need to do is preserve the integrity of this case, because we can't tell everything we're doing. We can't tell everything we know. And a lot of the stuff that we get called on, we've already done several times.
We want to urge you only to share information from official sources. The misinformation and speculation simply don't help the case. Our teams continue to sift through hundreds of tips, and it turns out most of them are rooted in rumors and bad information spread on social media.
That causes us confusion with all the tips that we get and we're going through. A lot of it is coming off of social media. And what we want to do is get more tips that we can rely on to help us find Summer. And that's our whole goal, is to find Summer.
We appreciate your partnership and ongoing interest in the search for Summer. Please know, as much as you want answers, we want them more. We ask that you understand that our priority has to be figuring out what happened to her. And as Sheriff Lawson mentioned, in order to preserve the integrity of the case, that might mean we cannot share everything we know.
On September 29, 2021, the case gained national attention when Summer was featured on the Investigation Discovery Program In Pursuit with John Walsh. The segment highlighted her disappearance and urged viewers to come forward with credible information. Meanwhile, the reward fund continued to grow, reaching $40,355 by September 27th. In October, the investigation remained active, but new developments highlighted both the persistence of the case and the growing complications around the Wells family. On October 11th, the Hawkins County Sheriff's Office reaffirmed publicly that Summer's case was still one of their highest priorities, Authorities emphasized that leads were still being pursued, including inquiries into the red Toyota Tacoma, previously flagged as a potential witness vehicle. That same month, another decision was made about the reward fund. Originally set to expire in mid-October, the fund was extended until June 15, 2022, marking 1 year since Summer's disappearance. Under the terms, if no one came forward with qualifying information by that date, the money would be donated to the local child advocacy center. National media coverage also continued. Following its late September premiere, the episode of In Pursuit with John Walsh, featuring Summer, was rebroadcast and promoted in early October, keeping her case in the national spotlight and encouraging tips from a broader audience. On October 21st, another reminder of the search's impact emerged when the Madisonville K-9 Search and Rescue Program, which had deployed dogs in Beech Creek during the early days of the search, was formally disbanded by its city board. The decision drew criticism, with the fire chief pointing out how vital those dogs had been in rural recovery operations.
And they're tools. Just like a fire hose helps us put fire out, these dogs help us find lost people.
That's the fire chief of Madisonville. He's kind of fighting for his animals after part of his program was disbanded. Ashley Boley traveled there today to learn more about how some of the chief's most valuable assets have been laid off. He's trying to get city leaders in Madisonville to change their mind about this, Ashley.
Yeah, that's right, Ted. There's 3 kinds of certified canines helping with missing and lost people: human remains detection, tracking and trailing, and area search. But none are being used right now, thanks to a 3-2 vote in the last Board of Aldermen meeting.
They're not decorations for the station. They are working dogs. They are certified and trained just like the firefighters are.
Madisonville Fire Department has 3 canines and 1 in training on its search and rescue team, helping people who are missing or lost, including spending a day in Hawkins County searching for the missing 5-year-old girl, Summer Wells.
It was rough terrain, up mountains, down mountains, just letting these dogs work, trying to find the little girl.
But the Board of Aldermen voted to disband the search and rescue program.
Sad, because this is something that's very needed in this community.
It's a low blow.
On October 26th, a juvenile court judge issued a gag order in the Child Protective Services case involving the Wells' 3 sons. The order barred all parties from discussing the children or the proceedings with the media or anyone outside the case. Meanwhile, the reward fund continued to climb, reaching more than $58,000 by October 27th. Just days later, Don Wells was arrested and charged with driving under the influence, adding yet another layer of legal trouble for the family. As autumn turned to winter, Summer's case once again drew national attention. On November 11th and 12th, the Wells family appeared on the syndicated talk show Dr. Phil. The 2-part special gave them their first national stage, and what unfolded quickly became one of the most debated moments of the case. In the first episode, body language experts sat down with Don and Candace to review their accounts of June 15th. Don stumbled through his answers, hesitating and stammering, and even shifted from calling Summer's disappearance an abduction to a kidnapping, a word choice the panel flagged as unusual. But it was Candace who drew the most attention. Reluctant to be interviewed at all, she whispered her denials, and when asked directly if she knew who took Summer, her mouth moved but no sound came out. When pressed further, she finally broke down, saying, "They're not helping me," before walking out of the session. The expert stopped short of calling her deceptive, but said her body language suggested she was holding something back, perhaps not involvement, but knowledge she wasn't voicing. The second episode placed Don and Candace directly across from Dr. Phil. He told them plainly that he did not believe they killed Summer. The timeline and the massive search effort made that scenario nearly impossible. But when it came to Candace's account of the afternoon, he was blunt. Her story didn't make sense. Candace said she walked Summer into the house, helped her mother with a knee brace, and returned within 2 or 3 minutes to find her gone. Dr. Phil rejected that outright. He told her the sequence doesn't work, not logistically and not psychologically. In his view, her claim of calling for Summer almost immediately was inconsistent with her demeanor. She didn't present as a hypervigilant mother reacting in panic. She didn't just vaporize, he said. Someone had to take her out of that house, and if it wasn't you, then who was it? He also contrasted Candace with what he's seen in countless other missing child cases. Most parents, he explained, will do anything. Polygraphs, DNA, blood tests, endless questioning. If it means ruling themselves out and turning the focus outward, they beg investigators to push harder. Candace, by comparison, resisted questioning, bristled at scrutiny, and ultimately walked away. For Dr. Phil, that reluctance spoke volumes. He pressed further, suggesting Candace might have what he called guilty knowledge, information she hadn't shared or even something she had pushed out of her own awareness because it was too painful to confront. Her halting answers, visible discomfort, and refusal to elaborate left a lasting impression on viewers, many of whom concluded she knew more than she was saying. The broadcast also touched on the removal of the Wells' 3 sons by Child Protective Services. Don admitted he initially agreed with the decision, fearing for their safety after threats against the family. But when the conversation circled back to Candace, her silence and unease only deepened suspicion. By the end of the 2nd episode, no new evidence had emerged, but the damage was done. For many viewers, the defining image of the Wells' national debut was Candace's reaction, her whispered denials, her breaking point, and Dr. Phil's open dismissal of her timeline. Sympathy was limited, suspicion was not. Later that month, on November 30th, law enforcement returned to Beech Creek for a 2-day planned search. More than 128 officers from 12 agencies participated, focusing on terrain that had been nearly impossible to access during the summer. With winter foliage reduced, crews pressed into overgrown areas using ground teams, aerial support, and cadaver dogs. On December 1st, a dive team from the Sullivan County Sheriff's Office also searched a nearby body of water. In total, about 350 acres were covered. Authorities stressed that there were still no new developments in the case. Meanwhile, the reward fund continued to grow, reaching more than $70,000 by late November and climbing to $73,705.90 by December 10th. On December 15th, 6 months after Summer's disappearance, 2 events marked the painful milestone. That day, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation released an official update. Investigators affirmed that the case remained active and ongoing, stressing that no evidence pointed conclusively toward abduction, but that every possibility was still being explored. They urged the public to come forward with credible tips and warned against unauthorized fundraising efforts claiming to be tied to law enforcement.
I'm Leslie Earhart with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. 6 months ago, 5-year-old Summer Wells was reported missing from her home on Ben Hill Road in Hawkins County. The case remains unsolved and weighs heavily on those working to find answers. Today, the investigation remains active and ongoing as TBI agents work alongside the Hawkins County Sheriff's Office and the FBI to determine what happened to Summer. Investigators have executed numerous search warrants, collecting all potential evidence. We've spoken with anyone and everyone associated with the Wells family, in some cases more than once. This includes neighbors, acquaintances, and those working in the area the day she disappeared. We've used a plane, helicopters, divers, canines, and every resource available to us during search efforts. Despite the countless hours of tireless work, the circumstances surrounding her disappearance remain unclear. At this time, there is no evidence that she was abducted. However, all avenues continue to be explored, including foul play and the very real possibility that she wandered off and became lost in the mountainous and rough terrain surrounding her home.
That evening, the community gathered for a candlelight vigil. Local churches and residents came together in prayer, remembering the missing 5-year-old and urging the public not to let her story fade from view. The new year began quietly, with no major searches or investigative breakthroughs announced. On January 17th, the reward fund stood at $73,705.90, the same amount it had reached in December. The fund was also formally extended through June 15, 2022, marking the 1-year anniversary of Summer's disappearance. Under the terms, if no qualifying tips were received by that date, the money would be donated to the Child Advocacy Center of the 3rd Judicial District. Church Hill Rescue Squad, which managed the fund, also used the moment to push back against rumors. Some in the community had speculated that the agency itself might benefit from the money if no tipster came forward. Officials stressed that this was false. The funds would only go to a tipster or to the Child Advocacy Center as promised from the start. Yet beneath that calm turmoil simmered. 2 days later, on January 19th, deputies were called to the Wells home after Don Wells was accused of physical abuse. His wife, Candace, reported he had grabbed her by the throat and shoved her against a wall. She also claimed her thumb might be broken. When police arrived, both admitted they had been drinking. Don denied any assault, and Candace appeared unfazed, using her thumb with normal dexterity, speaking freely, and showing no visible injuries. EMS found no medical evidence of harm. Ultimately, deputies referred the case for private prosecution. Notably, this wasn't the first time the couple's volatile relationship ended in police response. In October 2020, Don was arrested on charges of domestic assault, carrying a handgun while under the influence, and unlawful weapon possession. That incident stemmed from an argument at home. Candace alleged Don pushed her to the floor, injuring her knee. A firearm was found in Don's vehicle, and deputies noted signs of intoxication. Candace filed an order of protection stating she was afraid for myself and my children. 4 days later, she asked for the order to be dismissed. In April 2021, domestic assault charges were dropped, but Don pleaded guilty to the weapons offense. February 4th, 2022 marked Summer Wells' 6th birthday. The milestone passed with her still missing, her family fractured, and the investigation continuing into its 8th month. Just days later, on February 9th, Don Wells was sentenced to 11 months and 29 days in jail on DUI charges. The sentence included the possibility of probation after 180 days if he completed a 28-day alcohol treatment program. His incarceration added another strain on a family already under intense scrutiny. In late February 2022, investigators returned once again to the Beech Creek area for what was described as a planned, targeted search. Unlike the early efforts in June when thick summer foliage had blocked visibility and slowed progress, the winter landscape offered a different kind of opportunity. With the trees bare and the undergrowth thinned, law enforcement hoped that time and changing conditions might reveal something previously hidden. For 3 days, beginning on February 28th and stretching into early March, the TBI, Hawkins County deputies, and specialized search crews methodically revisited previously identified points of interest around the Wells property. These weren't random sweeps, but deliberate returns to steep ridges, hollows, and rough patches of terrain where evidence could have been overlooked. The land itself made the work grueling. Sharp inclines, loose rock, and sudden drop-offs demanded caution, forcing teams to move slowly and deliberately. Officials emphasized that, more than 8 months after Summer's disappearance, the search was still active and focused. Investigators took advantage of favorable weather to go deeper and more thoroughly than before, underscoring that the urgency had not faded. They reminded the public that this was not routine but a renewed push to exhaust every credible lead. This winter operation followed earlier efforts, including the November 2021 search of roughly 350 acres with air and dive teams, and the massive initial search that covered an estimated 4,600 acres in the days after Summer vanished. What set the February-March search apart was a sense of precision. Investigators weren't just retracing steps, they were deliberately turning over ground that had resisted them before, using every advantage the season allowed. Despite days of careful work, no sign of Summer was found, but the message was clear. Even with months past, the case was not dormant. The investigation remained active, and the search for answers was still very much alive. It was during this search that Sheriff Ronnie Lawson told reporters the Wells family was no longer cooperating.
No, they're not cooperating right now. They have attorneys.
Is there anything else on that front you wanted to say or speak about?
Not right now.
That statement drew immediate pushback. Summer's grandmother, Candace Harrer, gave her first on-camera interview, insisting the family had not lawyered up and that she personally remained available to investigators. She said law enforcement knew how to reach her, but had not contacted her since mid-December. Harrer also retraced the events of June 15th. The day began with a trip to the emergency room for her knee, followed by swimming at Warriors State Park, errands, and groceries. Later that afternoon, Harrer, her daughter Candace, and Summer replanted cactuses outside her camper. She remembered Summer coming to her for a peppermint, her favorite, before announcing she wanted to play with her brothers. According to Harrer, Candace walked Summer back into the house, asked the boys to keep an eye on her, and that was the last time she saw her granddaughter. When Summer could not be found, Harrer said the family began yelling and searching, even sending Summer's brothers down the hill while she stood watch, afraid someone might take them too. As she put it, to be blunt, it was hell. All I could say was, "Oh God, not again." She was referring to her daughter, Rose Marie Bly, who vanished from Wisconsin in 2009 and has never been found. For Harrer, the nightmare of losing a child had repeated itself with her granddaughter. But while Harrer emphasized her heartbreak and maintained that Summer had been abducted, it does happen, in small towns, in big towns, in the country. I believe somebody took her. Lawson did not back down. He repeated that the family was not cooperating. The contradiction was stark. On one side, a grieving grandmother insisting she was open to investigators. On the other, the sheriff himself publicly suggesting the family was withholding cooperation. The 3-day search ended with no breakthroughs, but the divide between law enforcement and the family was now in plain view. By April 2022, nearly 10 months had passed since Summer Wells disappeared. For the first time, Detective John Pruitt, the lead investigator on the case, spoke publicly about the search. His words painted a picture of a long, exhausting investigation weighed down by silence, false leads, and fading hope. In the early days, investigators had an open line of communication with the Wells family. Pruitt described visiting them almost daily, checking in, and making sure they were doing okay. But that changed once attorneys became involved.
The lead investigator for the case explained how that, as well as how her father's current stint in jail on unrelated charges, hasn't moved this case forward.
The family has attorneys involved, and that is not a direct line of communication.
It was a sharp shift from what Pruitt described as a pretty good relationship at first. With lawyers now in place and Don Wells serving time in jail for unrelated charges, communication became strained. Still, Pruitt insisted the door was open if the family wanted to talk. The burden of the case weighed heavily on him. He admitted it was a lot to shoulder. A lot to carry, knowing that nearly 10 months later, Summer was still missing. Pruitt said his days are built around the case. Every morning begins with checking the tip line and voicemails, returning calls, and chasing down leads that come in. If something isn't resolved one day, he follows up the next. Nearly 2,000 tips have been received, but most of them lead nowhere. He emphasized that every tip gets checked, but also admitted that the so-called help from online sleuths and amateur investigators has often wasted more time than it saved. Despite the noise, investigators continue to dig. Pruitt described going through reams and reams of material, everything from surveillance video, GPS locations, and cell phone tracking, to electronic records and witness statements. All of it has been chased down, yet nearly 10 months later, the case remains in the same place as it was that first night. As for theories, Pruitt stressed that every possibility remains on the table. Summer may have wandered off, sneaking away to play. Abduction has not been ruled out, but investigators have found nothing to suggest it should be the main focus.
People are probably tired of hearing this. All possibilities are on the table. We're not completely eliminating the abduction idea, but there's nothing to lead us to believe that we need to focus on that alone.
He even noted how her small size, just 3 feet tall and 40 pounds, might have made it easier for her to move through the thick terrain that hundreds of searchers combed without finding a trace. But time has taken its toll. 9 months in, Pruitt admitted the reality no one wanted to hear.
I would hope that she is still alive somewhere, but we also have to be open to the idea that is no longer a possibility. I will follow up on everything I can to try to bring closure for this.
After months of searching, thousands of tips, and endless hours of data review, the investigation looked much the same as it did the night Summer disappeared. No closer to answers and no closer to closure. Alongside investigators, District Attorney General Dan Armstrong also spoke publicly for the first time. His role wasn't to run the search, but to provide legal authority and guidance, and to prepare for the possibility of prosecution if the case ever reached that point. On the night of June 15, 2021, it was Armstrong who formally requested that the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation join the search.
The sheriff will contact other law enforcement agencies, and but under the way the TBI is set up, I have to make the formal request for the TBI. So the sheriff, when in this particular case, he had called and asked for help from all the agencies, and then called me, and I asked the TBI to get involved.
The next day, Armstrong authorized the Amber Alert, designed to push Summer's case to every phone and every set of eyes across the region.
An Amber Alert is where a child is missing from either the person that's supposed to have legal custody of them or their parents. And so we put out the Amber Alert to alert everybody, including citizens. If you have a cell phone, your phone will go off on Amber Alerts. So you can be on the lookout and help us spot this child if the child happens to show up in your area.
Nearly 10 months later, Armstrong admitted the case was still in legal limbo. No one had been charged in connection to Summer's disappearance. Her brothers had been removed from the home by Child Protective Services, but no charges were filed over that either. Don Wells was serving time for DUI and probation violations, but that case was separate.
It's a case that has implications of the legal system and the law, but you couldn't classify it right now as there's no criminal charges been filed.
Summer's older brothers were put into CPS custody last July, but no charges have been filed over their removal. However, their father, Don Wells, is serving time in the Hawkins County Jail over DUI and violation of probation charges.
This is a very complicated issue that has been made more complicated by the players in this drama.
He explained that his office serves mainly as an advisor to law enforcement, helping ensure that every investigative step is taken in a way that would stand up in court if charges were ever brought.
We make ourselves available to both the Sheriff's Office and the TBI to advise them as to the consequences of the next step that they're proposing to take and how we can do it to where if there is eventually a prosecution, it'll be what they gather will be something that would be that we could introduce in a court. Make sure we cover all those bases.
If the case ever reached that stage, Armstrong said, the decision would move to a grand jury.
If it ever got to the point where we were ready to consider charges, then of course they would talk to me about what charges and who to charge. And a case like this would generally go to a grand jury if it ever got to that point.
For now, he remained on standby, briefed periodically but not daily, waiting, like everyone else, for the investigation to produce something concrete to act on. Nearly a year into the search, Summer's case stood at a crossroads. Investigators had spent thousands of hours chasing leads, scouring rugged terrain and analyzing data, yet the trail was no clearer than on that first June evening. The Wells family found themselves under sharper scrutiny, their interviews and behavior fueling debate and suspicion. From community vigils to national talk shows, the case had moved far beyond Hawkins County, into living rooms across the country. Law enforcement, too, was showing signs of strain. The sheriff suggested cooperation from the family had faltered. Detectives spoke of the enormous toll and admitted that, even with mountains of evidence collected, no theory yet fit the facts. The district attorney reminded the public that the case lived in a kind of limbo. No charges, no closure, no answers. And as the one-year mark approached, new questions loomed. What would happen to the reward fund, now topping $70,000, as its deadline drew near? Would investigators renew large-scale searches, or would time itself become their most powerful ally? The search for Summer Wells was far from over. In many ways, the most contentious battles, over truth, over trust, and over time itself, were only just beginning. And soon, with the one-year milestone at hand, the investigation would enter a new phase, one that would test the courts, the community, and the family at the very center of it all.